Ja, we zijn.
Is there also that camera on? The one?
Oh, dit is de.
Je bent echt net op tijd. Echt net, hè? Maar ook maar net. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about optical coherence tomography. So OCT is the optical equivalent of ultrasound. In ultrasound, you send light pulse into the tissue. The light pulse is scattered back by the tissue. You measure that reflected sound wave or echo, and you determine the depth by the time difference between sending out the pulse and receiving the echo. Okay. And I will explain to you a lot of the details and what you can do with this technology. But first, put this into context. So if you look at the currently used imaging techniques in medicine, I've made a list here with their respective resolutions and what you can see in terms of pathology on those with that resolution. So if we start here with the diffuse optical tomography, I won't discuss that, but photon emission tomography, I'm assuming you're all familiar with that. Yes, very good. It has a resolution of about, well, I put it here at the centimeter, but it's sub-centimeters, but several millimeters resolution. Then we go to the magnetic resonance imaging, computed tomography and ultrasound. You're at the resolution of about a millimeter. And then you have the high frequency ultrasound, the high magnetic resonance imaging, and the modern X-ray CT systems, and you can reach a resolution of about 100 micron, a tenth of a millimeter. And what can you see? Well, you can get a full body image. You can see something on the organ level, and if you look at 100 micron, you can say something about tumor staging. But if you then look at how is a diagnosis made in the hospital, it's never based on these technologies. The golden standard for diagnosis is still histopathology. So histopathology means you need to get a piece of the tissue, you take a biopsy, you take the piece of tissue, you slice it in very thin layers, about 7 micron thick, you stain it, and then a pathologist looks at these stained tissue slides to come up with a diagnosis. And the pathologist not only looks at, let's say, the cells in the tissue or the intercellular structure. Intercellular structure is important. For instance, in cancer, the nuclei are not spherical anymore. They become elongated. That's the part of the division process. But he also looks at the macroscopic picture, which means on a larger scale of millimeters, what is the structure of the tissue? Do I see disruption of the normal layered structures that I expect? I will show images of lung and of the retina, and what you will see is always very nicely organized layered structures. That's in general how your epithelium works. Let's say I call it the topological outside of your body, so the inside of your mouth, your esophagus, your intestine, urinary tract. All these organs somehow interact with the outside world, and to protect them, they have their different layers that accommodate them. So nicely layered structures. But in tumor growth, it's in general an uncontrolled cell division process. It disrupts this layered structure, and so it's the morphology that's also very important. Tumor cells also excrete the metalloproteinase. That's a protein that breaks down collagen. It's part of the disruption that the tumor does to the environment. It needs to grow. It needs to destroy, let's say, the natural structure of your body. Collagen is the fiber structure that keeps your body together. I don't know if you heard about scurvy, in Dutch, scheurbuik. That was a disease that affected, not even a disease, that affected the sailors in the 17th century. It was caused by a lack of vitamin C. And what had happened is you were breaking down the collagen in your body. It led to bleeding of your gums, loss of muscle strength, and finally you die. So collagen is a very important structure in your body. Okay, histopathology is still the golden standard for cancer diagnosis, despite all these imaging techniques. The only imaging technique that approaches the resolution that you need for histology is microscopy. Well, microscopy is what the pathologist uses to look at the tissue, resolution of about 250 nanometers, a quarter of a micron. But basically all these techniques are light-based. And what I'm going to show you now, OCT is also a light-based technique. It approaches this resolution that you can have with microscopy. So the outline of my talk is I will discuss interferometry. I will discuss the spectral width and the resolution of your sources and how it affects the resolution of an OCT image. I will discuss the sensitivity of your measurements, spectral domain techniques, that is a different version of OCT, and Doppler OCT and polarization sensitive OCT. The Doppler OCT is analogous to Doppler ultrasound, where you can measure blood flow, and polarization sensitive OCT doesn't really have an equivalent in ultrasound and actually in any technique, but it's a method by which you can measure tissue fiber structures, so muscle, collagen, and so on, nerves, also very nice linear structures, and polarization sensitive OCT is capable of measuring that. Okay, like I said, OCT is the optical equivalent of ultrasound. In ultrasound, you send in a sound wave, and if you would do the same with light, you would send in a very short light pulse. It's being backscattered by the tissue, you measure it with the detector, and from the time delay, you measure the depth from which the wave was reflected. The problem is the speed of sound versus the speed of light. Speed of sound in water is about 1500 meters per second, and the speed of light is 3 times 10 to the power 8 meters per second. So that's a difference of an order of magnitude of 5. Light is 100,000 times faster than a sound wave. And that poses an incredible problem, because how are you going to measure these time delays now? With your ultrasound detector, you needed a certain time resolution, but if you do it with light, you need a time resolution that's 100,000 times higher. And that makes it virtually impossible to measure these very short time delays of a reflected light wave that has traveled about 1 or 2 millimeters in tissue. So the direct ultrasound approach is not possible. But we can do something else. We can make use of interferometry, and we can build an interferometer where we have our light source here. We split the light into 2 arms, a reference arm and a sample arm. And upon reflection, I recombine the lights of this reference and sample arm, and they will interfere here at this beam splitter on the way back. And that interference I can measure. It splits back into an arm that goes back to the source and an arm that goes to the detector. And my detector measures now the interference between the reference arm and the sample arm. And the interesting thing is, I'm going to use a light source where I only see interference between these 2 arms if they're approximately of equal length. So this is a property of a light source. This is called a low coherent light source or a broadband light source. And the feature of this light source is when you split it up, you send it in 2 arms and it comes back and interferes. You only see the interference if the path length is about the same. And I will explain that later how that works. Okay, with that phenomena, I can now start to move the mirror in my reference arm back and forth. And every time this reference arm matches the length in the sample arm for one of these 3 tissue structures that I have here, I see an interference. And so what I do is I move my reference arm back and forth. On my detector, I plot here the intensity that I measure at the detector as a function of the position of my reference arm. And I see here then 3 interference patterns. The first one matching with the first layer here, the second interference pattern matching with the second layer, and this third interference pattern matching with the third layer. And so, by making use of interferometry, I can slow down this echo process and still measure with light the equivalent of what I could do with ultrasound. I'm just seeing if I have a yes. So this is a nice example of an animation of a surf. Well, it's always good you first get the concept right and then we dive into the math. But so this is the concept, right? You see here your sample arm, your 3 layers. You move your reference arm back and forth, and you measure here at the detector a signal, the interference between the sample and reference arm. And every time you have a match, you get this interference pattern. And what you do, you take that interference pattern, you do an envelope detection, you detect an envelope of this interference pattern that gives you the strength of the backscatter and amplitude or intensity, and you can turn that into what we call a depth profile. And if you do then many depth profiles next to one another, in this case that is 2000 depth profiles next to one another, you create an image, and that image in this case is of the back of your eye. This is the retina. We're looking here at the photoreceptor layer that is right here. This dark layer is the nerve fiber layer that transports the signals from the photoreceptors to the brain. The optic nerve path is the location where all the nerves leave your eyeball and go towards the brain. Fundamental part of the technique. Okay, so before going any deeper, let's first take a look at the just getting this screen out of the way. A simplified Michelson interferometer. So I have my light source here. I have a glass plate that splits the light into a sample and a reference arm. So this is my reference arm. This is my sample arm. Light is reflected from these 2 mirrors, recombines on the beam splitter. Here, it's when you recombine these 2 waves, is where the interference takes place. Half of the light is sent to the light source, and the other half is sent to your detector. So this detector measures now the interference created by this reference and sample arm. Yes. What happened now? All right. So I can take a monochromatic laser. A monochromatic laser means a laser with a single wavelength emitted. So it's like the green, my green pointer, right? When you look at it, it's green, it's only one color. So that's what we call a monochromatic light source. We split the light into the sample and the reference arm. We recombine the light on the photodetector. And on that photodetector, I will see now a signal in intensity that is a function of the path length difference between the sample and the reference. So here's the path length difference at 0 path length difference. What happens here? I see a maximum. What does that mean in terms of the phase of this wave that comes back from your reference arm and your sample arm? They're in phase, right? The arms are of equal length. They travel the same distance here and here. So when they come back on the mirror, they are in phase and they will constructively interfere. And that is exactly what I see, the constructive interference between 2 waves. Now, if I move my reference arm a little bit, I go to a minimum. How far do I have to move my mirror to go from this constructive interference to the destructive interference? Sorry? Half the wave, right? So we need to introduce a path length difference between these 2 arms that is half a wave. Then these 2 waves are exactly out of phase and they will destructively interfere. So in order to do that, we need to move this mirror actually by a quarter of a wave because the light travels back and forth that extra distance. Quarter of a wave movement. I get out of phase and I go to minimum. Then I move my mirror even further. I get a maximum again. Mirror displacement is half a wave. Back and forth path length difference is then a full wave. And the two waves are in phase again and constructively interfere. So I can write my displacement, delta L, when I move my mirror with a constant velocity as the velocity times time. That is the displacement delta L, path length difference between these two arms. And I can write down the phase difference between the waves reflected from the reference and the sample arm as 2 times the wave factor k. And the wave factor k is defined by yeah. And a wiper. Is there a wiper? There is no wiper. Okay. Where? Oh yeah, thanks. So k is 2 times pi divided by the wavelength. And so the phase difference is given by 2 times k times delta L. Why do I have a 2 here? That is because the path length is traveled twice. So that gives me my 2 for the path length. So delta phi, I can write it out, is 2 times 2 pi divided by the wavelength times delta L. And so if we look at it, we can look at it like this. This is equal to 2 times 2 pi times delta L divided by the wavelength. So delta L divided by the wavelength is that path length difference expressed in wavelength. For each integer of that, I have a phase difference of 2 pi, and you get twice that distance because I travel it back and forth. Okay, so the intensity that I see here is then given by a baseline intensity I0 multiplied by 1 plus the cosine of this delta phi. Delta phi path length difference. And with that, I can write it as 1 times the intensity of as 1 plus the cosine of 2 times pi times f times t, where f is a frequency. And that frequency is given by 2 times the velocity of the mirror divided by the wavelength. And so when I move my mirror with a constant velocity, and I look at this signal, then this signal will change as a function of time. So this oscillation then has a certain frequency. That is this frequency here given by 2 times the velocity of the mirror divided by the wavelength. So I can turn that moving mirror signal that I measure on my detector into a frequency. Okay, that was for a monochromatic wave. But what happens now if I change my source to a low coherence source? So in this case, this is an image of this is the graph of the detector intensity that I see versus the displacement of the mirror. And for monochromatic light, that just continues forever and ever. And if you have very special lasers, this can continue for over kilometers, hundreds of kilometers even. But these are extremely monochromatic lasers. The other option or other possibility is using, instead of monochromatic laser, a laser with multiple wavelengths. If I do then the same experiment, what I will see is an intensity that is basically 0, but only at mirror displacement 0, I get my interference pattern. I alluded to that already with how it's shown and how it works. But here you can see that the interference pattern is localized in space. It has a limited distance over which you can see this interference. And that displacement of the mirror over which you still see the full width half max of this interference pattern is called the coherence length of your source. It's a characterization of the source. It tells you what the path length, for what path length differences you still see interference between two arms in the interferometer. Okay, so how do we create such a low coherent source? How can we localize this interference pattern in space. And I mean, it's a key feature of creating an echo. If you would do OCT with a monochromatic light source, you wouldn't have any depth resolution because any structure at any depth will create interference. So let's start with a laser that sends out a monochromatic wave. This is an output from our Michelson interferometer along this axis of intensity. Here we see the interference pattern when moving the mirror in the reference arm. So this point is clear, zero path length difference, we get constructive interference. Then we get here constructive interference. How much have we moved the mirror to reach that point? And then back and forth, it's half a wavelength. Are the waves in phase or out of phase? 180-degree difference in phase. That's exactly out of phase. Take a cosine maximum. When you go to a minimum, that's 180 degrees, and 360 are the maximum. So quarter of a wave gives you half wave path length difference, 180 degrees out of phase. You would end up doing a minimum. Okay, so this one then is half wave of the mirror. Sorry, yeah, half wave of the mirror, full wave back and forth, and you get constructive interference. Okay, let's turn off this laser and turn a second laser on with a different wavelength. So here we see again for wavelength 2 the interference pattern for when we move the reference arm mirror. Which of these two wavelengths is longer? Can you deduce that from these two, from this graph? Sorry? Lambda 2 is longer. And why do you conclude that? Yeah, but based on what?
The maxima, the second maxima is more to the right. Maximum is more to the right.
Yes, so it means you have to move the mirror further away to get this constructive interference.
Yeah, yes.
Yes. And so you're right, this is the longer wavelength. So you need to move the mirror further away to get the mirror displaced by half a wavelength, back and forth a full wavelength to get this constructive interference. So you're absolutely right. The wavelength 2 is longer than wavelength 1. And then this one. I'm looking at this half of the audience. Which one is longer? Which one is the longest wavelength of these three? And why? Sorry? Number one is the longest. Yes, absolutely. Because you need to move the mirror even further. This is the mirror displacement to get to a maximum. Okay. So what happens now if I would turn all three lasers on at the same time? What would my detector measure?
We do something through each other at sort of regular intervals.
They all will start to interfere with one another. Will wavelength 2 interfere with wavelength 1? It's not a simple question, huh?
Using sound, it does.
Does it?
Yeah, absolutely. We look at a sort of pulsating.
Yeah, I see where you're.
Very close to each other, sort of pulsating, because they sort of go in and out of phase at regular intervals, depending on the difference between the two frequencies.
Yes, for sound wave, you can make that argument. For light, it's a little bit more complicated because I can write down wavelength 1 is something that is oscillating at omega 1. So you can see that, right? And then I can write the E field as e to the power I omega t. This is the and the certain amplitude. The amplitude of the E field, E times I omega t. And then this, the omega t is the oscillation part, is the frequency of the light, right? And I have my second wavelength, 2, and that is A2 E I omega 2. I put here 1 omega 2 t. So that is my second wave. And now I want to look at the interference between these two waves. What do I write down to get the intensity? I write down the intensity is E1 plus E2 multiplied complex conjugate. And that is how I turn electromagnetic fields into intensity. I multiply the field with the complex conjugate. So let's do this. Move this up a little. I already get comments online that I can't see anything. No, they're happy. Is E1 star plus E1 E2 star plus E1 star E2 plus E2 1 E2 star E2, yeah. Okay, this term, if I take these two fields, what will it give me? And then, oh, sorry, this is A1, but of course. So this term, E1 with E1 complex conjugate, this. Or is this already correct? It's already correct. Now I do this one. This one, EI omega 1 T is the E1, and E2 complex conjugate is E2E minus I omega 2T, minus I omega 2T. So this is the interference term, right? Plus A1, A2, E minus I omega 1 minus omega 2T. And then the last term. So the total, what I get here is A1 plus A2 plus A1 A2 plus 2 A1 A2 cosine omega 1 minus omega 2T. You see here that this is an interference term. So I have two different wavelengths. I interfere them with one another. And what I see is I see a constant term, which is just wavelength 1 with itself, plus wavelength 2 with itself, plus this oscillating term. And this oscillating term oscillates with the frequency delta omega. What's the frequency of Y approximately? Terahertz, right? 10 to the power 8. So this difference rapidly approaches hundreds of megahertz. And you can calculate what this frequency difference is for two wavelengths, let's say 800 nanometer and 801 nanometer. The difference is only 0.1 nanometer. And you will find out that this is an extremely fast oscillation in hundreds of megahertz range. So will your detector see that? Are there detectors fast enough to see hundreds of megahertz?
Somewhere probably.
It's getting there. It's getting there. So sorry, hundreds of gigahertz, hundreds of gigahertz. So, telecom is running at 5 gigahertz. So it's getting there. But you can immediately see that that the interference between two different wavelengths is so fast that it's very hard to see. So what you can say is basically the two wavelengths of the interference between two different wavelengths actually doesn't occur unless you have extremely fast detectors or you measure over very short time scales. So that brings me back to your remark about what happens now in my interferometer if I turn all these three light sources on at the same time. What do I see in my detector? Wavelength 1 only interferes with wavelength 1. That was my derivation here, and this is the interference pattern that I see for wavelength 1. Wavelength 2 only interferes with wavelength 2. This is the interference pattern that I see, the intensity for wavelength 2. What will happen now if I turn on these lasers, these three lasers simultaneously, and I do the same experiment by moving my reference point? What do I see if I only turn on one laser? You can talk to your neighbor if you don't know. This is another one. You got you guys in the back. Do you have an idea what happens? No, why do I get pulses? I have to actually drawn what I do when I turn on one laser. When I turn on one laser, this is the pattern I see. I turn on the second laser. What do I see now?
So we got one of the bigger wavelengths, the super.
Not really, because wavelength 1, this wavelength and this wavelength don't interfere. That's my derivation here. They're basically independent. That's the argument I'm trying to make. That the intensity of wavelength 3 and the intensity of wavelength 2 are completely independent from one another. Whether you will see this pattern for wavelength 2, whether or not you turn on wavelength 3. But what I do see is the sum of these interference patterns. Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, it's all right.
So what I see on my detector is the sum of these three interference patterns simultaneously. And what will that look like? It will look like this. And for zero delay, all three patterns have constructive interference. And so when I sum them up, I get a maximum here. But when I go here to this position, so where my wavelength 2 has a maximum, wavelength 3, which was the shorter one, already has passed it, and wavelength 1 still needs to get there. So they sum up to a lower value. And the larger I make that path length difference, the more these interference patterns of the wavelength will run out of phase. And at some point, at a large distance, they will actually wash away against one another.
Yeah, this pattern should just repeat, right? The thing you see above.
Yeah.
It repeats over distance.
That depends on the characteristics of your source.
Presumably you do sort of like the
No, it's not. It's not given that this pattern will repeat. That's a good point. I know where you're going.
Because that's kind of my initial point, that if we add these up, you just get sort of this, but this pulsates, and then just repeats in time.
Yes.
You get these pulses.
Yes.
And this is exactly like adding up sound waves. Which
Yeah.
we're doing, at the top.
But there's one very important thing for this pulse pattern to repeat. And that is in your source, you need a certain distribution of intensities. So I can take a source and I can draw a graph here of the intensity. So this is the intensity that I have, and this is wavelength. And basically this is a Gaussian shaped source. Okay. If I look at this source, it will never repeat. If I ever look at this source, so it's now not a continuous Gaussian, but it's a picket fence. This, if I use this source, the pattern will repeat. But what you need, the way to look at this, and I will get to that later, is a Fourier transform. Basically, the pattern that you see here, that localization in terms of space, is a Fourier transform of your spectrum. And if you want it to repeat, you need the picket fence pattern in your source to get the repetition of your pulses. Why do you think of pulses? That is because you think of a laser cavity, right? And then you have a pulse traveling back and forth. And every time, it has traveled the full cavity length, a pulse comes out. But if you look carefully at the inside of the laser cavity, is every wavelength present in the laser cavity? No. Every wavelength that comes out of the laser needs to match an integer times the cavity length. And so that creates that picket fence in the output of this laser. That creates the repetition. We're off topic a bit. Some of you, this might
I
be.
also presume that the laser would be monochromatic. So they can use only at one way. Anyways,
If you have a monochromatic laser, it doesn't pulse.
yeah, right. Then how difficult is it to just have a, say, sort of duochromatic laser, which just happens to.
That is actually very common. It's very difficult to make a narrow laser. So what in general happens is that you get a laser output that has these lines around the center wavelength, where you have maybe 5 different wavelengths coming out of the laser. You take all mini lasers, it's very difficult to make a monochromatic. So in that case, yes, you get multiple wavelengths out of the laser. And with that is also a coherence length associated. And this pattern then would be created. And from that laser, you indeed will see a repetition of that pattern. So let me put it this way, it's very difficult to make a continuous source that does never repeat. Because in a laser, you have a laser cavity, and the laser cavity already makes the spectrum a picket fence. Okay, but very rare was that we use these different wavelengths, and then when we look at the interference pattern, it becomes localized in space. And you can describe that length over which there's still significant interference is the coherence length, and the coherence length is defined as 2 times the center wavelength times the natural logarithm of 2 divided by pi divided by delta lambda. And delta lambda is then the width, the spectral width of my source. So if this is my Gaussian source, then delta lambda would be this distance from here to here. This is then delta lambda. What does this tell you? If I want to do OCT, do I want a laser source with a very broad or a very narrow spectrum? Sorry? A broad spectrum, and why?
The longer the various the higher resolution.
You're going in the right direction. It's a shorter coherence length. So your delta lambda is large, so a very large bit. You divide by it, so your coherence length is very short, and that gives you a high resolution image. You can discriminate different lengths in your path length in your reference arm. Oh, sorry, in your sample arm. Let's take a look. What is this? Oh yeah. So these are another graph of the same. This is the signal intensity as a function of path length difference for monochromatic light source, and this is the signal intensity for 3 different wavelengths. And then when I add them up, this is my interference pattern that I see, and then this width of the interference pattern is called my coherence length, and in OCT that would be my actual resolution, the resolution along the propagation direction of the light. Okay, it's 45 minutes, so we have a break, and then we're going to do some math, which you won't like, but anyway. Okay. What I would like to do is I would like to describe how the interference pattern that starting from scratch, starting from electrical fields that travel a certain distance and have a certain phase, and how does the spectrum then come about in creating this localized shape. So what I wrote down is E field as a function of depth location on the scene. And I write that in this form here. So what is this form mean? It's E wiggle K. And E wiggle K is my base vector for the field strength at wavelength K. So this is the amplitude of the field at wavelength K. And then that wave travels a certain distance, and it has acquired a phase minus IK. So it travels a different C, and when it has traveled a different C, it has acquired a phase that is given by K. And K to 5. I love that. I can see that this is a phase. Okay. What I integrate over here is K. So I'm going to integrate for the field that I have at my depth location C over every wavelength that is present in my source. So this part here describes my source. Amplitude of my source. Okay. So the average of this source, so E wiggle K times E wiggle K prime. That's it. So that means at a different wavelength, this one, if I ensemble average it, is a delta function. What is first? It's the power of my source at wavelength K times the delta function K minus K prime. And so what does it mean that I get a delta function here? It means that I get I get the fields at wavelength K, but my source in randomly units field. And I have my field at a different wavelength K prime. And these two fields are completely uncorrelated. They have a different amplitude and they have a different phase. And especially because they have the different phase, if I look at ensemble averaging of two random numbers with random phases, it only leads to something when K prime is equal to K. Because only in that case, what I have here is E wiggle K complex times E wiggle K. And if this has a random phase and this one has the complex conjugate phase, and it actually gives me something. But if these wavelengths are different, these waves are completely random, and it doesn't lead to anything. And how do I get the spectrum out of it? Well, if I have a certain amplitude of my field at wavelength K, and I have that amplitude complex conjugate or complex conjugate times itself, it gives me the intensity of my source at that phase. Okay, so I need this expression, that second expression, yeah.
Somebody said that they cannot see the blackboard,
Yeah.
and there are comments you can do, but you don't do that. Apparently.
Well, I read them, but I don't know how to turn on that camera. Can you turn the camera a bit? Okay. I don't know if it's on. In the other room that was on, right? No, I don't think it's on. When I refer to the camera in my laptop, I think. Good question. Video settings? No. Wait. I don't know if this camera is connected somehow. Dirk, do you know how I turn on this camera?
Die zit op die vaste computer in de zaal.
Deze zijn. Je zal die computer ingaan.
Ik kan mijn laptop draaien. Is het Blackboard nu te zien op de...
Als u hier schrijft aan deze kant en dan de laptop.
Ja, oké, maar wat ik daar schrijf, staat ook gewoon daar. Hè? Het is gewoon dezelfde uitleg. Alleen. Dirk,
Ja,
kun je nu het bord zien? Als ik mijn laptop zo heb staan?
ja, het is een beetje onder in beeld, maar ik zie wel wat. Ja.
Oh ja, nu zie ik. Nee, ik zie niks. Ik zie mezelf niet, dus ik weet niet of het klopt. Oh ja, nu zie ik het wel. Zo.
Ja.
Oké.
Okay, so we have the amplitude of the source gives me the source spectrum as a function of k times the delta function k minus k prime. And I can define my source as a Gaussian. So here, this is the expression for a Gaussian. It's k minus k naught divided by kappa. Kappa then defines the width of my spectrum squared. This is a Gaussian, and I can calculate the full width half max of this Gaussian. So what it means is this is my source spectrum intensity. S as a function of k. Here I put k, and then I get this is my spectrum, and then this width here is I can express as delta lambda. The width of my source, and that delta lambda I can express in the parameter kappa, which is here of the Gaussian, square root of the logarithm of 2 times the wavelength, center wavelength squared divided by pi. Okay.
So let's take a look now.
Let's take a look at the intensity. So the intensity that I measure at my detector is the E field coming back from the reference arm
plus the E field coming back from the sample arm multiplied with its complex coincident. So the reference arm complex coincident plus the sample arm complex coincident. And I can factor out all these different terms now. So it's the reference arm with its complex conjugate, the sample arm with itself, complex conjugate, and the interference term of reference arm with sample arm and reference arm with sample arm. So this one just gives me a background intensity, but the reference with sample arm gives me an interference term. Okay, and I have now an expression for these E fields because that is what I derived here. It is my E field as a function of depth. And I have an expression for what happens with this amplitude of the source. It gives me, so these are the two ingredients that I need. I'm going to plug that into this equation for my intensity of the detector. And I'll just do one term here in detail. So that is the reference arm times the sample arm complex conjugate. This is the reference arm. This is I travel. This is ZR, reference arm. This is the E field from the sample arm. I travel a distance ZS. This is the complex conjugate of the sample arm intensity. I integrate over K prime. I'll pull this integration over the whole thing. I have my ensemble average brackets here, and these ensemble average brackets turn my E wiggle K and E wiggle star K prime into a delta function and spectrum. So what I end up with, if I do this, I end up with the spectrum, the delta function. I integrate one of these K dependencies out, and I have here an expression that is EIK ZS minus ZR. Remember here it's K ZR, K prime ZS, but due to the delta function, K prime becomes equal to K, and then I can get the difference here, IK ZS minus ZR. And now what if you look at this, does somebody recognize this expression? Sorry? Well, you're getting close. It's not delta function, but what if I do this? And omega is integral f t e omega t d t. What do you call this? Yeah, this is a Fourier transform, right? If you look at this one, what does it look like? I'm basically giving you spoon feeding you the answer. What is it? Fourier transform. Yes. So this is what you see here is that in this interference term of sample and reference arm actually is a Fourier transform of the spectrum. Okay. It took me only 3 lines. Okay, so that ZS minus ZR I can express as a delta Z. So I have my intensity as a function of delta Z. It gives me the intensity of the reference arm, which was this one here, the intensity of the sample arm, which was this one here, and then we get this term and its complex conjugate. One of these was here, and so if I have the complex conjugate, I get this expression, but instead of a plus I get a minus I here. I sum them up, and what I get here, that complex, this complex e to the power something complex plus e to the power minus something complex is a cosine. So we get a cosine. So what do I see here? That interference term as a function of delta Z is 2 background intensities that I get back from my reference and sample arm, plus this interference term here, which is a cosine transform of my source. It's not a Fourier transform anymore, it becomes a cosine transform. Okay, now that's nice. I've derived that the intensity I see is a Fourier transform or cosine transform of my source. So when I look at this, if I do this, this cosine transform of my Gaussian spectrum, this was my definition of a Gaussian spectrum, this is the cosine. If I do this cosine transform,
I get a cosine modulation given by my center wavelength K naught times the path length difference between the sample and reference arm multiplied by an exponent. And if you look carefully, you recognize this again as a Gaussian. It's a delta Z divided by delta L squared. This is a Gaussian that decays over length delta L. And delta L in this case is 1 over kappa, where kappa was my the parameter that I used to define the spectral width of my source. So if I look at the width of my source, delta lambda, it's proportional to kappa times a certain parameter. So kappa is related to the width of the source, and delta L is my coherence length. How fast does this function decay with changing the path length difference between the sample and reference arm delta Z? So you can see that this becomes a very narrow function when delta L becomes very small. This is my coherence length, short coherence length, and my coherence length becomes very small when my source is very broad. Okay. And then, so the full width half max, if I do the calculation of my interference pattern, is then given by delta L coherence length times 2 times the square root of blah, 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 blah. So this is now the definition of my resolution of an OCT system. Coherence length defines my resolution, 0.44 times wavelength center squared divided by delta lambda. Okay. And I have a trick question. So the signal in my OCT is this interference term. This is because this is just a constant background. No matter of what my depth location is, I always measure the reference arm intensity plus the sample arm intensity. The information is captured in this interference term. So if I look at this interference term, what happens if I double the reference arm power? What happens with this signal term here? Does it get bigger? Or does it stay the same? And where in my equations do I have to go back if I double the reference arm power? Which line? The fourth line. 1, 2, 3, 4. So here, you want to double which one? The ER. ER, you want to double it. When you double ER, what does that do to the intensity? You agree, times 4? Yeah, because the intensity is the field square. Okay, so if the intensity goes up by a factor of 2, how much does the R increase? Intensity goes up by a factor of 2, how much does the R increase? The other way, square root.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So you need to square root. So this one becomes bigger by square root of 2. And if this one becomes bigger by square root of 2, then this one also becomes bigger by square root of 2, and this one becomes also bigger by square root of 2. So this is beautiful, right? If I have a weak signal, what do I do? So I have a measurement, and my interference frequencies are kind of weak. What do I do? You have the answer? Yes, increase the reference arm intensity. Because if you double it, it goes up by square root of 2. And this is a beautiful phenomenon. It's called noise.
you can increase the signal. I mean, I worked with ASML, you know, this company that makes the waiver steppers. I had to explain them this concept of noiseless amplification. And now they're super excited about this approach to their controllers.
Yeah, I'm quite following. I can see why the intensity increases and all, but I was under the presumption that the signal is just the sort of interval part, right? That's the only sort of oscillating correct, which we're interested in.
Yeah.
But how does that increase? I don't see any. It's like SK increase.
Yes, SK, it then increase with the square root of 2. And so if ER increases with the square root of 2, that would lead to an increase of SK with the square root of 2. I mean, the simplest thing is I just put the square root of 2 here in front of it.
Yeah, I just.
And then it ends up here, then it ends up here, it ends up here. Sorry, it doesn't end up here, it only ends up in front of this one. Yeah. Because if you look at amplification in general, electronic amplification, you amplify a signal, but at the same time you add noise to it. And so if you take an electronic amplifier and you take your versterker, your audio amplifier, and you don't put anything in, and you turn the volume fully up, you hear noise. Right? That is the noise that is generated by the amplifier itself. It's thermal noise from the whole device. So the amplifier adds noise. The way it works is because the noise is so low that when you send in the signal from your iPod or from your record player, that signal is so much larger than the noise of the amplifier that you don't hear it anymore. And so, but you have to carefully balance that. You have to make sure that the input in your audio amplifier is significantly stronger than the noise that is generated at the input out of the audio amplifier. If it's the other, if the signal is really weak, you would amplify it, but you would also amplify the noise and you hear noise. In this case, it doesn't matter. Sorry? This one?
Yeah.
Yes, very good. We will see.
Next.
Do you think noiseless amplification comes for free? No, and this is going to cause the problem. I'll get to that. But very good point. Okay, where am I? So basically, what we this is then like the reinforcement graphics. But what you measure is a Gaussian multiplied with the area. This is the Gaussian expression. This is your area, your cosine, and that's the interference pattern that you see as a function of moving the reference arm in the system. Okay. And then we finally got to the graph I showed you in the beginning, and now you completely understand all the components, all the aspects of this interference pattern that you see. Okay. Let's get to another part of the OCT. So the low coherent source generates depth resolution. It segments the data into coming from different depths, but that doesn't say anything about the lateral resolution. So can I discriminate 2 points that are next to one another when I scan my beam over? For that, we need something that is called the lateral resolution. And so lateral resolution is used, or the lateral resolution of the OCT system basically comes from the concept of confocal microscopy. And in confocal microscopy, this is the very simple explanation of the principle. You take a light source, you put a pinhole in front of it, so it's basically a point source. That point source you focus with the lens in the tissue. So I'm looking at the black lines in this case. So your light is focused at this position in the sample. It's reflected from that particular point, and so it travels nicely back and focuses back in the pinhole of your source. But since I put the beam splitter in here, it also focuses nicely in the pinhole of your detector. And so what happens now with that light that travels towards your focal point here, but it gets scattered along the way at this location. So at this location, field falls in, gets reflected by something in the tissue, comes back. And now I see that this point is not perfectly focused in my pinhole. Right? It's not imaged properly back to the pinhole, but it's much larger. And so putting a pinhole in front of my detector, I select only photons from a particular depth. They need to come out of this location here that's perfectly imaged in my pinhole. So this is the principle of confocal microscopy. Basically very simple, very elegant technique. You can build this into a system that can really rapidly scan, but what you need is lenses with a very, very high numerical aperture. You want to really focus tightly to beam into a very small point. And that's what you do, and then you change the direction of this beam, and you can do a very fast lateral scan of the tissue. And these are some examples. This is nerve tissue, connective tissue, skeletal muscle, blood vessels, adipose tissue, fat cells, and skeletal muscle. Very simple technique. But what we get to is, if we want to have depth dissection with confocal microscopy, we need a very tight focus, right? Because we reject light that's coming out of the focus, but only the light that's coming from our focus area is detected by the detector. So let's take a look at Gaussian optics. Gaussian optics is the way we describe Gaussian fields. So focus beam waste, omega 0, this is the radius of the beam, is then defined by the wavelength times the focal length of the lens divided by pi divided by omega. And omega is now the beam diameter on my lens. So beam diameter on the lens, focal length of the lens, together with the wavelength, define the radius of my focus. But that's one parameter that goes in. The other thing is, how long is my focus? And I define the length of my focus by something that's called the Rayleigh range. And the Rayleigh range is the distance from the narrowest point of my beam to the location where it has increased by a square root of 2. Okay? So that is my Rayleigh range. If I look at my Gaussian optics and I look at what the Rayleigh range is, the Rayleigh range is defined by pi times the smallest radius squared divided by the wavelength, or wavelength divided by pi divided by the numerical aperture of my lens. Okay, and I'm giving you a few examples. So if I have a beam diameter, and this is at a wavelength, I think of 800 nanometers, certain beam diameter of 30 microns. So that means that this is my focus, right? If 2 omega naught is 30 microns. And then I have approximately the same focus over a length of 1 millimeter. If I, however, would really tightly focus the light, so I would use a much larger beam diameter on my lens, or a much shorter focal length, then I get a very small focus here, and my Rayleigh range, the length over which this beam remains approximately this diameter of 3 micron, remains is then 10 microns. So Rayleigh range of 10 microns. So my question then is, what is the preferred setup for focal microscopy? Do you want the 30 micron focal diameter and a depth of focus of 1 millimeter, or do you want 3 micron diameter of my focus and a Rayleigh range of 10 microns? What is the best configuration for a confocal microscope? Of what? So you say you prefer this one, 3 micron beam diameter, 10 micron Rayleigh range. Yes, and can you also explain why that is preferred?
Because the image pitches to the smallest possible, and focal microscopy depth is not important. Yes. So To see more detail.
The first part, you want the highest detail, so that's why you want the smallest lateral dimension of your focus. But the depth sectioning depends on that Rayleigh range, right? In confocal microscopy, if your Rayleigh range is only 10 micron and only about over a length of time, 10 micron here, will you properly focus back to the pinhole. But if your Rayleigh range is a millimeter, then over a full length of a millimeter, all that light is steered more or less back to the pinhole. So with confocal microscopy, you completely lose your depth sectioning mechanism if you have a very long length of your focus. Okay. So for focal microscopy, you want a very short focal length, very small focus. But if you look then at OCT, then this would be the problem. If you take a 3 micron diameter of our focus and then Rayleigh range of 10 micron, then we can only create a sharp image over a length of a depth range of about 10 micron. And what you would like to have a good, decent, sharp image over a depth range of about a millimeter. But with this very small focus diameter and this Rayleigh range, if you go like 100 micron above this point of your sharpest focus, you know, it becomes completely blurred. Your beam is much bigger. So the idea in it's shown in this graph here, that this is your beam focused in the tissue, right? This is your depth section due to the coherence length. And then here you can see what the lateral resolution is, which is basically defined by the Rayleigh range of this incoming beam. And if I would choose a different beam, for instance, this one, where, you know, over a much shorter distance, so your Rayleigh range would be much shorter, and only over a much shorter length you would have a sharp. Yes? Okay. I'm going to skip this one. I think Dirk dealt with blood absorption and blood. Okay, and so this is now an image of a nail plate. So if you look at my finger here, it's probably this my finger. You see my nail here, and then my nail disappears under the skin. And that is what you see here. Nail plate. This is called the cuticle, proximal nail fold. Nice thing is that you actually can see the area where the nail is growing. This is the nail plate. This is completely under your skin. That's where your nail grows. And this is then a typical image of at 1310 nanometer. That's the center wavelength of your source, resolution of about 8 micron, source spectral width of 70 nanometers. Okay, then some nomenclature. So a single depth profile we call an A scan. So if you look at the depth profile in the retina, this is what the signal looks like. So then you scan over an area, you can turn this into an image. That's what you see here. This is called a B scan. And then when you do a whole area, you can create a volume, and that volume you can display it different ways. But if you call it into if you turn it into an en face image, which means that you look at it as if you took a picture of the back of the eye, we call that a C scan or an en face image. Yes.
How good of a resolution can we achieve
in the retina?
Just in general.
A Rayleigh range of those numbers were not out of the hat, but a Rayleigh range of about a millimeter then gives you a lateral resolution of about 30 micron. And then if you look at the depth resolution, which is governed by the coherence length of the source, then you're looking at like 5 to 10 micron. So the decent numbers for many of these systems are on the order of 30 micron lateral resolution, 10 micron depth resolution. And also, if you look at these images in the eye, that's about the same. the pupil of your eye is limited, so you cannot focus very tightly into the retina, so you get the diameter of the beam of about 20 to 30 microns. Then you look, this is a depth profile. Do you think this is a nice signal, or is this just a bad measurement? Do you think that a signal like this, you can turn into a figure like this? Move the next one. I see some skepticism. This is the real signal corresponding to this image. So this shows you a little bit of the beauty of your brain. So you take this depth profile, you turn it into a grayscale scale depth line, and you put many next to it. Your brain is very good at filtering out all this stuff and recognizing stuff. You see very nicely layers here. But well, AI is doing an excellent job, but before AI, we really had a hard time finding the boundaries between the layers. Because, you know, find the boundary in the signal of this noise. Anyway. Okay, so summary of technique. The fringe amplitude, the amplitude of the interference pattern is proportional to the amount of reflected light from a specific depth. The longitudinal or the depth resolution is determined by the coherence gate of the reference arm, so and basically the coherence length. The lateral resolution is determined by focusing optics similar to confocal microscopy. And the penetration depth is determined by the scattering coefficient of tissue. The signal decays exponentially with depth. That's Lambert-Beer's law, and I'm pretty sure they're covered that. Okay, so when we go on, how do we process this information? Like I said, I have the intensity, which is the reference and sample arm field together, multiplied with its complex conjugate. I get this reference background, sample background, and the interference term. So my intensity as a function of path length difference is given by this expression here. The E fields are here now replaced by the square root of the reference arm intensity and the sample arm intensity, cosine modulation, and that Gaussian function that gives you the actual resolution. So I asked this question already. After reference arm power double, how much does the interference term increase? And the answer is then a square root of 2. I might double the reference arm power. I get the 2 underneath the square root sign, so the signal increases with the square root. The way I deal with this, and I won't explain it, is that the signal, what I call signal of my system, is defined as the square of this intensity. Square of this intensity. So my signal is the intensity squared. And with this definition, if I double my reference arm power, then my signal also doubles, because my intensity goes up with the square root of 2, but my signal is the square of my intensity. Okay. I have an exercise, I think, because I see answers on my sheet. Is this the first that you need to make an exercise? But it's 4 hours of lectures, and I'm supposed to give you 2 hours of lectures and 2 hours of you can skip the exercise. What it means.
And I have another one you can do with color. Yeah, I'm good with that. Kan ik eigenlijk kan ik iets in de chat plaatsen voor de mensen die thuis zitten? Oh, wat is nou voor onzin?
That's best. De tweede keer. En kunnen samen. Ja, gewoon de tweede is een andere plek. Als het is zijn, is hard. Ik denk dat één is mensen. Dan moet hij dus in plaats van wat voor de twee dan. Ik denk dat dit is een beetje en die kan ik dus ook dan niet weer. Ja. Dan moet mij krijgen een van de expositie en deze is dat ik vraag. Als je dan weer wordt gesproken, dan zou je dan dit concreet weten. Bij de intensiteit ja, dus die intensiteit is heel ja, dus dan een 2, dan een 1, maal 1, maal 1, ja, en dan is dan wel.
Oh, yeah, I think it's right. Yeah, okay. I forgot to say. Don't give you to do on it.
Oh, maar er wordt dus 2 keer gesplitst. We hebben een kriteria gedaan. Ja, een half in man. Does it work? Ja, als ik denk dat het ook niet aan Yes. 100 keer zwaarder en dat is eigenlijk 4 keer maar er zelf al gewoon
Ja. Ja. Maar
En daarna wil ik dus dat je ER met ER doet. ER met ER complex gecorrigeerd. Dat geeft je die IR. Dan wil ik dat je deze uitrekent. Dus dat geeft je S. En dan wil ik dat je deze uitrekent. Ja, je ziet wel maar herkennen.
Ja, ja.
Deze twee zelf te zodat ik daar aan wil. Het goede antwoord staat op de volgende slide. Ja, kunt u bij al. Ja, een beetje los. Weet je. Voor deze komt een half één. Ja, die andere komt 0,1. Ja, maar ja, dus 7% afval. Ja. Ja, maar je hebt nu geschreven dat het natuurlijk bedrijf is even als wauw, complex. Ja. Dat is een en voor die set, als je wat legt, dus we hebben het. ZS is 2 maal L. ZS is 2 maal L1 en ZR is 2 maal L2. L2 is de spiegel, dat is die arm. L1 hier is de sample arm. Hoe lang is het pad naar de detector? Nou, naar L1. Dat kan je doen, maar dat moet dan vallen. Zowel voor de En dan hetzelfde met die in dit geval, als er invallen, en dat is hier dat je dan even zoiets uitschrijven, die identificatie van ik ben ze even. Die zullen altijd elkaar tegen de rol maar dat is verschil. Wat is even uit voor de simpel maar uitschrijven. Ik denk dat het wel weer ja, dit is de sample arm. Alleen je moet niet de afstand zetten. Zet dus niet van beginnen. Zet er alleen zet. Dus niet specifiek voor een arm. Dat telt met in de detector. Wel, er is een afleiding. Ja, dat is een ernstig uit allemaal. Maar als je dan de tekst ja, zegt plus. Wat mijn maar Zullen we niet wie dat dan? Ik zal het doen. En ze willen met je praten. Ja, ja. Dit zou ingevuld. Ja, inzet tegen een complexe. Deze term wel de basis van twee van twee. Ja, oké. Hier komen nu dus zet.
Wel, identiteit komen als twee. En na de flexie hou je 1% van de eruit halen. Hier starter. Wat? Niet zeg maar als je kijkt, dan halen ze 1% van de tijd.
Ja, ik heb wel voor dat je het probleem is niet zijn opgaan. Die wel. Die verschillende deze en andere eerste dan waarom? Oh, dat wel. Ja, niet voor één, maar voor die. Dus hier sprak er voor één. Lijkt me. Ja, ja, oké, even dat zwakker wordt, dus dan één zwakker. Ja. Het wordt wel uitgenomen. Dat is zwakker. 2 keer kijk. Ja, daarom is het steeds uitgeschreven wat die één mag. Ja, dan toch eens hier staan. Ik heb er eentje uitgesproken. Twee, hier voor de één. Dan met de midden. Dat ik hetzelfde aan het bij is.
Ja.
Nee, hier. Twee keer L.
Oké.
Twee keer. Ja.
Ja, dat van dat. Hou je intern over. Dit zo uitsnijden. Oh ja, ja.
Ja, maar hier heb ik nog een
En dat is even dat Nee, ja, als je ze Ja, oké, nou. Deze mensen, yes. Wel, en dit ook. Ja, dan denk ik inderdaad.
Okay, the big reveal. Correct answer? Yes.
Yes.
And is A, what is the amplitude of AP1? First, that is the square root of R. I should have explained it to everyone of you individually why it is the square root of the reflectivity of the mirror. You get a half because it's the square root of 2 is once through the beam splitter. Square root of 2 again coming back through the beam splitter, so that's a factor of 2. And what is the phase or the path length up that the light is propagated? That's 2 times L1. Then for E2, we lose the square root of R, the reflectivity is 1, so we get a half E K 2 L2. Due to my poor handwriting skills, some people thought this was a Z, but this is a 2 here, 2L2 minus 150. Intensity, to go back to your first year or second year optics lectures, then you know it's a half CE E0 squared. Let's forget about these three vectors, so that's not important. We have to calculate the interference with this E with this complex conjugate, so E1 plus E2 times E1 plus E2 star. We write it out in these 4 terms, and then the first term is this is the sample field, 0.01 times 1/4 the infalling intensity. The E2 times E2 squared is 1/4 of the infalling intensity falls onto it, and then we get the interference is 0.1 divided by 4 times E squared times this first term plus the second term, and then you immediately can recognize this as a cosine term. This gives you your cosine 2K delta L. So the whole intensity that you measure at your detector is one intensity that is independent of your path length difference. The second intensity coming from the reference arm, independent of the path length difference, and then this interference term that depends on your path length difference. And this was all done for a monochromatic light switch. Yes. Which one here? If we take this one and I multiply it with its complex conjugate, I get 1/4 of E squared.
Wasn't it supposed to be divided into
Sorry?
it wasn't supposed to divide into
Intensity in half.
yeah, it says that the last speaker applied the intensity of the frequency.
Yeah,
Wouldn't that affect the dividing by the square root of two?
for the E field. But it has to travel back to the beam splitter. It has to travel back to the beam splitter to reach the detector.
Okay.
So that's your second factor, your second square root of 2. Yes? Okay, give an expression for the frequency of the measured interference expressed in the mirror velocity and the wavelength of light. We're not going to do that because that takes too much time. This is that is how because it's basically in the slides already. If you go back to one of the earlier slides, I actually showed how the moving mirror is translated into a frequency of the interference. Yes. This the one that I just gave you is difficult. So I don't think we will ask that, but that's to ask here.
Where the person gets the village job.
Sorry? She wanted to know if you can expect a question like this on the exam. I think if I look at the results after 30 minutes, that you will all horribly fail. I will look at most, I might not ask an identical question. For my optics exam, I explain this this problem, or the one that I just had on the paper, and on the exam I might ask the same thing for Mach Zehnder interferometer. You know what a Mach Zehnder is? Okay, this is my incoming beam. This is a beam splitter, splits the beam into this half and this half. These are two mirrors. They reflect the lines back to the second beam splitter, and this is my outgoing beam. This is a Mach Zehnder, and in principle, it's very similar to a Michelson interferometer, where this would be L1. L1 is this path here, and L2 would be this path here. But the main reason I have this exercise for you to refresh you a little bit on your calculations with fields, what that means for intensity, complex conjugation, and this. And I like you to train that a little for the rest of my lecture. But I think it's an oral exam, is that right? Has Dirk already decided how he will grade you guys? No? Okay, then I haven't said anything. Hmm? Normaal is out. Ja, dat is. Ja. Dat gaan we niet doen. Okay, so I want to introduce noise. Huh?
Because I told you that there is this concept of noiseless amplification, because first nothing comes for free. So we have to look at the noise to figure out what happens in the case of noiseless amplification. So I'm going to introduce a few definitions. That is thermal noise, shot noise, and intensity noise. That will be the next part of what I'm going to talk about. Then the question is, what is noise power? Because we like to calculate in powers. And what happens when you have a light falling onto a detector, it generates a current A or a voltage B. And that's how a detector works. It converts the infalling intensity into a voltage or a current. Okay, we know that the power is proportional to the current, or the voltage times the current, or in other words, the voltage squared is squared divided by R, or the current squared divided by R. So what we have on our detector, if you want to turn that into power measurements, and that is the electrical engineers do this all the time, then you deal with what your detector measures squared. And as you might have remembered, I introduced on this slide here the signal as the square of the intensity. And that is nice because the intensity is measured in volts or currents. That's how my detector measures it. And then my signal is the square of that. And that then nicely matches my definition of power here. That is the voltage or the current squared divided by a resistance. That's then of course with proportionality. Then we can look at the noise. And the noise is defined then as the intensity that I have minus the mean intensity squared. So this is the definition of variance. And this definition of variance is now also in units, intensity squared. And so now I have a noise definition that has the same unit of power as my power definition for the LCP system. And this is nice because now I can compare the power of my measurement with the noise defined in the same way. And I can calculate something that is called the signal to noise ratio. The ratio of my signal divided by my noise, signal to noise ratio, and that's a crucial parameter that tells you basically the quality of the measurement or the quality of your system. Okay. So, what kind of noise arrives at this detector? Oh, I make a big jump here. Is that true? I'm going to skip this one. I'll get back to that later. So what is the noise in an OCT system? Well, first of all, you have the detector noise. And what happens in a detector, it measures a photocurrent. It uses an amplifying signal to turn that current into a voltage, and the voltage is the output of your system. Now, unfortunately, as I already explained to you with audio amplifiers, these amplifiers are not noiseless. So they generate noise at the output. And in a circuit like this noise is basically generated here at the input of this amplifier. This detector noise is a constant as a function of the light intensity. So it doesn't matter how much light falls onto this detector, it always generates the same kind of background noise. So it's intensity independent. Okay. Then we have the problem that light is actually a stream of photons that fall onto the detector. And we know this is the experiment of Young's slit experiment and Einstein's photoelectric effect experiment. The double slit experiment showed that light is a wave and it creates interference. But this experiment, photoelectric effect experiment, shows that light is actually a particle. And how was that demonstrated? Because a light beam falls into potassium, and you need a certain energy to free an electron from this material. And the classical thought was, well, if I want to have an electron emitted from this material, I just increase the intensity of the beam that falls onto the material, and at some point, the electron will come out. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case. If you used 700 nanometer light, you could increase the intensity more and more and more. No electrons were ejected from the material. You needed to hit a threshold wavelength here at 550 nanometers, and then an electron was ejected from the material. And this led to the particle interpretation of light, that it needed to be a photon package with enough energy to free that electron. And then when you do the proper calculation, you can calculate the velocity of the electron that's being ejected, and then you can see that there's that increases with the, if you make the wavelength shorter, the velocity of the electron freezes because excess energy is then converted in the velocity of the electron. So now we have this particle picture of photons. And also, but not less surprising, I think, is the particle picture of electrons. So what does this mean? It means I have a light source. Out of that light source comes a stream of particles, which hits my photodetector, which generates a stream of electrons. Now the problem is that this is not a perfectly continuous stream of electrons or photons. If I take time slices, sometimes I measure more photons or electrons, and sometimes I measure less. So when I measure the intensity of my signal as a function of time, it fluctuates. And this is purely due to the particle nature of light and the particle nature of electrons. And this has a name, and it's called shock noise. It's a fundamental noise. So you cannot eliminate shock noise because it's related to the particle nature of electrons and photons. Okay, then in electronics, there's this famous expression for what is the shock noise current. What is basically the noise and the amplitude of this noise for a current that is going through a conductor. Is defined as the square root of 2 times Q, this is the fundamental charge, times the intensity, so times the current itself, times the bandwidth over which you measure. I mean, at what frequency spectrum do you look when you analyze this this noise? But let's look at the simple example. So this is an example of, and this is realistic. So I have a stream of photons. In one set delta T, I measure 7 photons. My second time slice, I measure 4. Third time slice, I measure 1, 6, 2, 5, 3. On average, I measured 4 photons in each time slice. And now I can calculate the variance, that is the actual number measured in a time slice minus the mean, and that is 4 here. And I square that. That is proportional, and when I do that, that is proportional to the intensity itself. So the shock noise is proportional to delta n squared. So delta, and this is the expression for delta n squared. Delta n squared is equal to n. So this, what we have found now, is an expression for the strength of this shock noise. Delta n squared is equal to n, where n is the mean number of photons. Okay. Then, what is the frequency distribution of this noise? So what I can do is I can take my signal, I can take this fluctuating pattern, this one here, as a function of time, and I can do a Fourier transform to figure out how strong the noise is at each frequency of photon. Okay. And in general, noise decays with frequency. So the higher frequency you look at, the lower the noise is. There's a famous thing that's called 1/f noise that is present in nearly all measurements. So the noise falls off with 1/f. The larger the frequency, the lower the noise. This shock noise is perfect wide behavior, which means the amplitude of the noise is flat for all frequencies as a function of frequency. So it doesn't matter at which frequency you look, it's always the same amplitude. So this is what you get again. Fourier transform of your time trace gives you noise at each frequency, and that is a flat function. Then we have a definition that's called pink noise, that is when it decays at high frequency. what happens in general, the photo detector will have as a cutoff frequency, as a limited frequency to measure. So then it decays off. So this is more of a measurement effect, but there's nothing to do with the fundamental noise properties of shot noise. Okay. So let's take a look at the Bose-Einstein distribution. So this is a distribution that tells you the probability to measure n photons given a source that emits on average n photons. So n bar is the mean number of photons emitted by the source. And this is for black body radiation. If I then look at what is the probability to measure n, then this is the expression. So this is an expression, probability to measure n photons. So with this probability, I can nicely calculate again my variance. Hey. If I use this probability and I calculate the variance that I get, then this is my expression. My variance is proportional to the mean number of photons plus the mean number of photons squared. Which one of these two I already discussed with you. Like in the previous slide. Which one? Shot noise, yes. And which one of these two terms is it? Okay. Sorry?
That's what it says.
Very good. Reading ahead. So this is the shot noise. So what we see that apparently next to the shot noise, there's an additional noise term coming out of this Bose-Einstein distribution for light. So I have another term, and as you can see, this term is proportional to the intensity, and that was what I said for shot noise, that the variance is equal to the proportional to the intensity itself. But here I have a term that goes with the square of the intensity. And then it is actually modified. If you can go and look at the theory, it has to do with the thermal modes that are present and the size of the black body radiator. Let's forget about all these things. It's modified by a certain factor. But the point is I have something that goes with the intensity, a noise that goes with the intensity, and a noise that goes with the intensity squared. So if I now make a graph, I can make a graph of the strength of the noise as a function of the intensity that falls on my detector. Okay, so if this is the intensity that falls on the detector, it's a logarithmic scale, and on this axis I have the noise power, the power that is contained in that. And if I have basically no intensity falling on my detector, my noise is given by the thermal noise of the detector. And this is just the noise generated by the detector. And then when I go and increase the intensity, this is the shot noise term. At some point, the shot noise will become bigger than this thermal noise, and then my noise line is basically dominated by this shot noise here. And then when I increase the intensity further, then I get that n squared term from the previous slide that starts to dominate. This is the relative intensity noise for Bose-Einstein noise, and that starts to dominate my measurement. Okay. So this is a fundamental feature of all light detectors, right? This is how the noise behaves when I measure intensity with the detector. It was always this thermal component, this linear part where you dominated by shot noise, and this term here that is dominated by the relative intensity. Okay. What happens next?
Yeah, I know what I want to say. Okay, so I asked you in the beginning, somewhere in the beginning, the question, what happens if I double my reference arm power? What happens with the amplitude of my interference fringes? You will remember the answer. I increase, sorry? It increased by square root of 2. Very good. And now I also gave you the definition that the signal is the square of that intensity. So how much does my signal increase when I double my reference arm? Factor of 2, right? So I have my interference fringes, and the signal strength in these interference fringes increases by a factor of 2 when I increase the reference arm power. If I look at my detector and I see what light hits the detector, the largest part is my reference arm power, because the sample arm power is attenuated by, you know, the exponential decay and the very weak scattering inside the sample. So the power of my detector is dominated by the reference arm power. So now I want to express something that is called signal to noise. So I have my signal to noise ratio. This is my noise. If I am right here, so this is my reference arm power, I get a certain signal strength. If I double my reference arm power, what will happen with the signal? Double signal goes up by 2. How much does my noise go up? And basically in this region here, where the detector noise.
Very little.
Very little, let's say not. Approximate here is flat line. So does my ratio of signal to noise get better? Yes. So this tells you if I am limited by the noise of my detector, I can increase my reference arm power and my signal to noise ratio will get better and better. Now I'm in this regime, right? What happens if I double the intensity of my reference arm here? What happens to the signal? Okay. Doubles. What happens to the noise? Doubles, right? It's the slope of one region of my short noise limited noise curve. So signal goes up by a factor of 2, noise goes up by a factor of 2. What happens with the signal to noise ratio? It stays the same, yes. So this is why we call, when we are in this window here, we are in the short noise limited detection window. We can't do better than that, right? Our noise is dominated by short noise. It's a fundamental noise. We can do nothing about it. Let's say we're in this regime here. So here, I again double my reference arm power. Signal doubles. What does the noise do? 4 times 4, yes. So what happens to my signal to noise ratio? Sorry? Halves, yeah, halves, exactly. So if you are in this regime here, your signal to noise doesn't improve anything. So when I said that, I said, is that noise was gained is for free? Yes, in this area, but not anymore here. So this is the window where you want to be. Short noise limited detection. You want your reference arm power to dominate over the over these other noise terms. Short noise limited detection. So this is I show you one example. So this is a typical measurement of an OCT system. What you see here is a depth profile, and we start to increase the reference arm power. And what you see when you increase the reference arm power, you see the background increase here. That is, let's say we take this area here is where we determine our background noise because there's no reflector there. And ooh, why does it do this? Somebody's playing tricks on mine. So here, this is my noise, and at the same time, I can look at okay, this is where I look at the noise level.
Because this is my detector power. I increase my detector power, I determine this noise level here, and I see that it increases along these dotted line. So my green line is my detector noise. The red line is my theoretical shock noise. And you see that when I increase that reference arm power, I start to approach this shock noise limit of detection. This is one of the measurements you do for an OCT system. Okay, I've explained you the principles. This is a little more detail of that calculation, but I think the previous slide gives you a nice example of what's going on. So why is this important? Huh? This is it running? Yes. But this is an OCT image acquired in about 2000. And what we look at here, it's not really visible, but this is a camera that films through the pupil, the back of the eye. And what we can see here is this dot. This is the laser beam on the back of the eye, and it makes a circle around the optic nerve. And every time a circle is completed, you see this cross-section of the retina over that circle. And you can see every time it's completed in this image, but what kind of things do we see here? Well, this here is the photoreceptor layer, inner plexiform layer, outer plexiform layer, inner nuclear layer, outer nuclear layer, nerve fiber layer. And you can see blood vessels. This is the blood vessel, because the blood vessel absorbs the light, it casts a shadow in the deeper layers. This image black is a strong signal, and white is a very weak signal. You can see the speed at which it acquires. So it takes 6 seconds for a single frame. These are 12 circles, so that is 72 seconds. That is more than a minute. And all I've done 12 circles around the optic nerve. And I'm doing the full scan of the retina. 12 circles. The problem is that you get motion artifacts. I challenge you to keep your eye open for a minute. If you think it's easy, but after 30 seconds, you'll realize it starts to itch and you're going to blink. My timing is right in the next slide. There's a blink. Oh, there's somewhere a blink. So the OCT, very powerful technology, first introduced for retinal imaging, but clinically not useful. It's too slow. But what do? It needs to go faster. Okay. This is the blink. The light is blocked, right? So we go to this original concept of OCT that I explained to you. That's this concept here. It's the Michelson interferometer, reference arm that moves back and forth, and then you get depth profile. 1991, famous paper in Science by Jimoto, senior author. This is really the start of the OCT perspective. Most cited paper. Then in 1995, Berger, he's from Austria, came up with an additional, with an alternative approach to doing OCT. He said, you know what? I'll take my reference arm here, but I keep it fixed in place. And in my detection arm, I want to introduce a spectrometer. So I have a spectrometer here, which means I have my beam collimated, it falls onto the grating reflects every wavelength into a different direction. I have then a lens that focuses each different direction into a single point on a CCD array. So on my CCD array, I get my light from the interference wavelength resolved in my detector. So let's take a look at what that spectrum then, that signal on that CCD array then looks like. So on my vertical axis, I have the intensity, and along the horizontal axis, I have wavelength. And what do I see here? I see a very dense pattern of interference, maxima, and minima. Okay, so let's imagine now that I look at this one particular maximum for a very narrow wavelength. Basically, that's a monochromatic line. Okay? I get an interference maximum. What does it tell me about the path length difference between the sample and the reference for that particular wave?
It's very small.
It's very small, but can you say more than that? Because what I see here, I see constructive interference for this particular. Look at one peak.
Like, I don't know how, what the max is really density, and.
This is the max. This is
Oh,
the
well, then it's
interference
perfect-
max.
Then it's perfectly,
It's perfectly in phase. What does that mean for the path length difference?
it means that the difference is modulo, like, supply and wavelength. Wavelength difference.
Yes, so the wavelength fits in integer times on the path length difference between sample and reference.
So you still don't know, yeah, exactly the range.
No, you don't. We'll get to them. Okay, don't worry. So now I change the wavelength a little bit, and if I change it a little bit, at some point I will reach a minimum. Destructive interference. So that wavelength fits an integer time plus a half wavelength from the path length difference. And if I change the wavelength a little further, I get to a maximum again. And then again, that wavelength fits an integer times from the path length difference between sample and reference. So I have a fixed path length difference between sample and reference, a fixed delta L. And now wavelength 1. So wavelength delta L divided by wavelength 1 fits n times, and delta L divided by wavelength 2 fits n plus 1 times. And that's that it has to follow that logic. And where lambda 1 to lambda 2 is the step from one peak to the next, and so on. And so my point is that this pattern encodes already for the path length difference between these two arcs. I can, because I know the wavelength step to go from n to n plus 1, from that step, I can calculate what delta L is. Okay, well, there's a very simple method for that. So this is now the intensity that my detector measures. And intensity as a function of wave vector is the reference arm power at this wave vector, it's the sample arm power at this wave vector, and it is this interference term where you get this Zn is the path length difference, K is so Zn is basically delta L. K is 2 pi divided by lambda, so that's basically this expression multiplied by 2 pi. Okay, that's the phase of my interference pattern. What happens if I do a Fourier transform of my intensity as a function of K? So I do a Fourier transform from K to Z. This natural patterns. So I can work out what it means for this expression. I can perform that on this interference pattern. What do I see? I get the peak, which is defined by the envelope here of my interference pattern, and I get the peak here at the distance of 230 micron that basically codes for the frequency of this interference pattern. Okay, so what have I done? I've replaced my detector with the spectrometer. I keep my mirror fixed. I take that signal as a function of K. I do a Fourier transform, and I have my depth profile. Nice, right?
Minimum.
What minimum?
Minimum peak,
This one?
the smaller. peak.
Oh, the smaller peak. This peak corresponds to the modulation frequency of the signal. And so this is a signal that consists of a pulse with a very strong modulation. And so then when you do Fourier transform, you first, the zero component of the Fourier transform is the area under the curve. Okay, so this peak here corresponds to the area under this curve, And then this modulation pattern creates this defect. To the Fourier transform of this function. So if you look at that from this is an animation that shows this. So here I have my spectrometer. This curve, this graph here shows the spectrum that I measure on my spectrometer, and this one here shows you the Fourier transform of this signal. So you know, if you have a Fourier transform of the real signal, you get the positive and negative frequencies, say. So that is what you see here. You get a mirror image. Also, you get your, this is the true image, and then this is the mirror image that you generate from the Fourier transform. So in this method, you create that from the intensity, you go and you throw away half of that image, the mirror image you throw away. Okay, again, I'm not gonna go into details why it is, but I'm gonna show you the result of this method. So this method of using a spectrometer actually has a sensitivity advantage. And in 1998, we had Gerd Hausler, who was a professor in Germany, who proposed that at conferences that the spectral domain method was superior to moving that mirror back and forth. And in 1999, Mitsui published a paper in the Japanese Journal of Optics, which is basically completely ignored by the field. But then people kept working on it. In 2003, it was experimentally demonstrated and theoretically derived that this spectral domain method is far superior to moving the mirror back. Not by a little bit, but by 2 to 3 orders in magnitude. So what does this mean? When you were before acquiring one image in 6 seconds, you could now acquire 100 to 1,000 images in 6 seconds. So this was a breakthrough in this technology where all of a sudden, instead of one image per every 6 seconds, in 6 seconds, you could do a full scan, full 3-dimensional scan. And that's what I'm going to show you. Again, I'll save you the details and how we did that, but this is the result. So here you see now a video of the retina of a human at 30 frames per second. And what do we see? We see nicely the blood vessels, the structure of the retina. You see the shadows that are being cast by blood vessels. There's a blood vessels. Light's coming from the top, from the top down. We have a blood vessel whose light is 850 nanometers, is absorbed by blood, and so you get a deeper signal underneath the sort of shadows that you see.
So this is real-time data acquisition?
Yeah. It is yeah. And it has completely changed this field. So you had one manufacturer of OCT systems that was Zeiss in California. They were selling basically the system that produced the frame every 6 seconds. It was like, selling the light. This came out. Many companies jumped on it. Nearly every company that was selling performance systems realized that we have to jump on this bandwagon. This is going to change the field completely. If we're not in now, we'll never recover. And so Optical started, Heidelberg Engineering started with their systems, and it has completely revolutionized the ophthalmology. Let me see if that's next. I have one. Okay, is this running the movie? Yeah, this shows you the optic nerve had that. and the fovea. So the fovea is this area here that is the highest density of photoreceptors. It's the only area with which you recognize characters or faces or you watch TV. With it, it's that this is right. That's it. And when you see this layer dip down, the photoreceptors are right here. So you want to have the photoreceptors next to the exposed light. It's a little bit of fun fact. So, how large the area is where you have a one-to-one connection to the photoreceptor and the nerve. As for instance, in my periphery right here, many photoreceptors connect to one particular nerve. And so I can't, when I look at you and I can't really see my, you know, how to put it there. As soon as I move it, I don't know. The periphery is very sensitive to motion. There's already signal process. But in the center part of fovea, that is where you have sharp vision. But let's put it this way. So how large do you think the area is of pixels? And as a reference point, when your camera has about 10 millimeters. Let's say 100 millimeters. How many do you think is in your eye? How many pixels are one connected to the Who says more?
It's Johannes, answer.
Yeah, very good. I'm very grateful that you came up with it. More or less. More. How many? Somebody less. It's only 10,000. It's 100 by 100. Huh? That is. I recognize you. That's with that 100 to 100. And the photoreceptor is in the fovea. That's where it's the smallest. It's about 3 microns. So if you're looking at an area of 300 by 300 microns. So if I have to put it in my fingers, it's about this big. 1/3 of the. If you miss that, it's blind. And this is the area you see here in this right. Okay, fun fact, be careful, you know, with that little area of you. I think it's maybe the most important part of you. I don't know, your brain.
Brain still has an incredible amount of information.
Yes, that's why when you move your eyelid, it fills the information of the protein. The motor process like that. For instance, that optic nerve, so it's not good, but it's the area where all the nerves leave the eye blood and go to the brain. They're not photoreceptors, so it's a blind spot, right? And I know approximately where it is, so it's a straight to do it, somewhere here, it's in my nail, in my blind spot. But my brain knows there's a nail. And it's very difficult to notice, I guess. To work, really hard to do it. You can do it. The classic one is a circle and a cross, and you look at the circle and the cross is over here, and then and you move in and out, and at some point the cross disappears. Okay. Anyway, so then one more thingy that is that I told you about how important it's going to be. So let's take a look now at the comparison to this is of course not the same eye. This is the histology of what you see here. Like here the photoreceptors, here is like photoreceptors here, interconnecting layers. You can see kind of the individual cells. Better. And this is the corresponding OCT units where you can't see several individual cells. Very nice. You see the layers of the retina. That's the power of this thing. Retina. You guys want to break or should I go on and then we're done by 5? Go on. Yeah, because it's all fun and images. And, I'm also going to skip this part because I want to go to a clinical case. Do I have my person that has A and D? Yes. So we're going to look at a person that has age-related macular degeneration. It's a disease where you get abnormal blood vessel growth in there. And the reason is not really known, but what happens is you get an overexpression of VHF, but especially when you fetal growth factor. It's a protein that cells make, and they're basically oxygen deprived. So they signal into the body, hey, I need more oxygen. Put some, build some blood vessels for me. It's a blinding disease because what happens you will see in the next images. This is a photo of a person that has this is standard photography they did 20 years ago of a person with AMD, and you can see these white arrows. They indicate in this photo an area that is slightly yellow. It has this slightly yellow. But it's more obvious. It's not the best quality, but there's a blood clot here at this location. How did they diagnose this disease? Well, you get new blood vessels and they're leaky. That's the problem. So what you do is you inject a dye in the bloodstream, you shine a laser in the back of your eye, and you look for these fluorescence. That's called the fluorescein angiogram. This is then an early phase angiography where basically the arteries are filling up with this dye. And then this is a late phase, so this is where basically it has already gone through the veins and has been collected by the liver. That goes very fast in like 5 minutes. But what you see here is remaining fluorescence. This is where the fluorescent dye has leaked out of the blood vessels, and this is an indication of where that this person has AMD, that blood vessels are leaking, and that the problem is right here. Okay, you see 3 lines, line 1, 2, and 3, and these are areas where we took OCT cross-sections. So now we're going to take a look at the structure of the retina at this particular location. So this is now the cross-section of this person's retina. You see here, this is the nice layered structure, retinal pigment epithelium. There's the photoreceptors. But you see here a blood clot. See enormous bump here. It's called RPE detachment, and if you, it will be more clear in the next slide, but there is something of a strange layer growing underneath this RPE. This here is a fluid membrane. What you see here are the photoreceptors, and here the photoreceptors are basically pulled off this retinal pigmented epithelium layer. Here there are still photoreceptors present. In this area, the photoreceptors are gone. So it's unknown. Are they? Oh, I forgot to tell you. Photoreceptors get their oxygen from this layer underneath. So right under the RPE is a very dense vascular layer. It's like a mesh. Photoreceptors are also the cells in your body with the highest metabolic rate. They consume the most oxygen. And strangely enough, they do that at night. And so at night, your oxygen consumption in the photoreceptors is higher than during the day. I don't know why. It's not my field. You can imagine that if this layer provides oxygen to the photoreceptors by diffusion, that if you have a fluid membrane in there, that oxygen doesn't get there, right? It has to diffuse over a much larger distance to get to the photoreceptor. So if this continues long enough, then these photoreceptors are completely oxygen deprived and they will die. Okay, so we go to section number 2, right here. So again, an area where the fluorescein was leaking. And this shows better what is the problem. Because here, what we see now is that here we have this RPE, this scattering layer. Underneath it, Brooks membrane, they're very close together. But here, what we see is this layer splits up. So here we have the RPE layer, retinal pigment epithelium layer. This is Brooks membrane, and right in between Brooks membrane and this RPE layer is a membrane. And this is the neovascularization that grows in a response to this overexpression of vascular endothelial growth. And this, the problem is that this blood vessel layer should not be there. It is weak and leaks, and that leads to these fluid membranes and all kinds of leaking blood and blood clots in the retina, and that is then causing blindness. If this persists, these photoreceptors will die. What you may not realize is this is right at the fovea. To go back, you might be able to recognize. You really see that dip. Remember that dip that is occurring, and right at the dip, you have a tremendous blood clot. So this person has serious problems with his vision. And then slightly away from it. And then when you go to the periphery, you can see again the fluid membrane, but over this fluid membrane, you can nicely see that the photoreceptor layer is still intact. Over the full length, you can see that they're still there. And okay. I think that you can appreciate what OCT has done in ophthalmology. I mean, previously you had to diagnose a patient in this image or on these two images, and with OCT you basically could show really the disruptions in the layers and what was going on with this patient. If you go to ophthalmologist, it's nearly standard. If you go to your optician, what is that, optician? For glasses, some of you might already have gotten an OCT for God knows what reason, but I do it. Okay, since I have a little bit of time left, I think that the next part is, okay, this is part 2, Doppler. I'm going to skip Doppler and polarization. I'm going to do that next time. I'm going to show you a little bit of what happens in the, I think I had, in catheter base. So ophthalmology, really popular. The other application is in endoscopy. OCT has a penetration depth of about 2 millimeters. So you can't go through the whole body. If you want to look at the lungs or the slokdarm, esophagus, you need to go in with an endoscope. The nice thing is that 90% of all tumors develop at the topological outside of your body. And so that lining that is exposed to the outside world is most sensitive to the development of tumors. You can kind of imagine that because it's that layer that has the tent of the outside world. It's, you know, it's the border where you get wars and borders. It's the border between inside and your outside world. So 90% of tumors develop at these interfaces, and when there is an topological outside, there is a way of getting there. So that is why endoscopy is very popular, and why OCT has been developed for cardiovascular imaging, for other reasons, but for the lung, for the esophagus, and for the bladder, OCT is being used to find tumors. And I want to show you one of the approaches. We developed tiny endoscopes with motors at the tip. So this is a motor of about 1 millimeter in diameter. The whole catheter is 1.25 millimeter in diameter. And then it becomes a lighthouse. You have the beam rotate like a lighthouse, illuminating tissue, and then you do a pullback and you get the whole volume. So this is an example of a pig bronchus. It's very young pig, so these very nice layered structures. Like I said, normal tissue shows these very nice layers. As soon as you would have a tumor in this lung, you would see just a clump of randomly scattering amorphous material. What kind of layers do I see here? This white layer is cartilage. What is very hard to distinguish is that you get muscle layers that are around the lumen.
That muscle layer is, for instance, something that's affected by asthma. If asthma attack, it's these muscles around the lumen that squeeze the lumen, and that leads to the feeling of benauwdheid. And now I don't know the English word. Who knows the English word for benauwdheid? Short of breath. Yes. Sure. Short of breath. The problem with OCT for cancer detection is that you have many things that can change the level of certification of the detection, or it can be a benign growth. So how do you discriminate something that's benign from something that is malignant? That is really the challenge for OCT, and I don't think OCT by itself will be able to solve. It allows you to see the structural information very nicely, but for tumor detection, you need more. There you get too much positive warnings because of abnormalities in the tissue. One of the ways forward, I believe, is to combine this with molecular imaging. Do you know what kind of molecular imaging is done in the hospital? Basically, my second slide. CT, is that molecular? What is CT? X-ray. You think that you can have a molecular sensitivity with X-rays? No. Ultrasound is ultrasound sensitivity. Sorry? What do you see with confocal microscopy? Yes, but what is the contrast mechanism? What creates the difference in signal that you make it? So you made the scan. Yeah, I said I measure one look. What did I see an image, right? What does that image tell you about the tissue? What is the property of the tissue that generates the confocal image? The amount of light you get, that is governed by scattering. And basically, it's a scattering contrast mechanism. Same holds for OCT. It measures scattering contrast. Is that molecular sensitive? Molecular, I mean proteins sensitive to a particular protein, sensitive to the cell surface receptor. Okay, next. Sorry? PET or SPECT, very good. So PET and SPECT are, in all the technologies I've shown, the only ones that have molecular. And how do they reach that molecular? Yeah, but what is the, it's radioactive, okay, so if I just drink radioactive radium, then I molecular sensitive. Yes. Except. And so we take molecule, monoclonal antibody, that binds to the certain protein, cell surface receptor, and then attach the radio tracer to give that phase, and then that PET tracer accumulates at the site where it binds the most. And you can do several monoclonals. You can, for instance, take the medication against the tumor, give the patient a small dose, and then check if the medication ends up at the site of the tumor. And you know if that's the case, it's not good. So that PET is the only molecular sensitive imaging. So if you can attach a radio tracer to it, you can attach a fluid. It's a hypothetical question. If you can attach a radio tracer to it, you think you can also attach fluid? Yes, that's an important question. Yes. So with all molecular sensitivity of PET, you can also do and the opposite side. You can take a monoclonal, take a fluorophore, and then you have molecular sensitivity. If you ask me, what I think is the
combination of the structural image, which is the equivalent of the CT or MRI image, combined with the rest of the area of macro, right? Because it gives the molecular specificity of the fact. So what you develop is optical equivalent that's look fast. So the principle of how is that molecular sensitive by the radio sensitive model. So radio and so that is basically my concern. Okay, 10 minutes to 5. And a small section of you I see back at the director. And by the way, if you want to do, I'm going to show you how we can measure that muscle layer in lung that affects this asthma failure. I think that's for
Oh, ja, graag gedaan. Bij weekend ook zelfs. Ja,